no, it's kind of new. So we're like 200 members. Yeah, no, it's not. So we're getting it off the ground right now. But it's so commerce. It was just created by the administration. They free out it. But it just comes with an extra. So like it's 10. But
I see.
yeah, it's like so we're going to scale. But like this project is like
Oh, that's kind of cool. So you come in, I'm working with investment banking, I'm working on that profit, and I'm like, okay, well, actually, can you buy the shoes?
I was a judge on some competition, and my fellow judge he's the guy that founded OpenView.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
He did. Oh, he did. Okay. Yeah, he was like, we gotta get you involved with the Asian community. And so we connected with the CLA thing.
Yeah. That's funny because that's how he got me roped into it.
Really?
Yeah.
I was just like, I don't know anything happening. He was just like, Joe, we don't change that. His job, he's funny. Still.
Okay. So, what do you guys, what do you girls
I think it's more like a academic thing sort of format. So you don't have anything prepared.
So what do you want to know?
Like, wait, Q&A, okay.
Yeah, but I think you have like a moderator who's just asks the questions and then you ask them
Well, I'm here very much because I'm very interested in that impact.
in net impact?
Yes.
Oh,
I
okay.
would love to get agenda that has,
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was doing that impact with kind of so like slightly different. We were actually the first college chapter of net impact. They like before I did it, they didn't have one. It was all like a big thing.
Yes, well, if you just want to
So that's how much
so then you can just
I don't know. I don't have any connection with the national park. I'm super into it. Like this is school and president and that.
really cool. What's your nothing, I'm just really into sustainability and like next week. Actually, the one that is
I mean, my interest in sustainability is what I got into venture. So the first venture capital
very chill.
type I felt like that was so
Thank you.
more. So how it all started.
So rather than
And now today, like fast forward, like it's definitely more prevalent thing. There's like impact funds out there. And, you don't have to be a clean tech to do. Just like at the time when I went into venture, I think it was one there's like this one big organization that focused on impact.
basically the reason.
But that was it.
Yeah, and now today we need to raise a contract them. Yeah, that's what I thought. But even now today, Boston doesn't have a whole lot. We have to figure it out. We're like, companies who have a lot of like initiatives, but so much cost. Yeah, so definitely. I feel like I keep doing it myself because the work is so demanding, like it's so demanding, but I try every effort to like be like, so I saw your name, I was like, oh, well, that's definitely something I'm interested in. Usually, never really like paid to go anywhere. Other than like networking events, like But I'm glad you connected with Ian because I'm sure it's like just like a small circle in Boston. It's college, so it's been like a while, a long time. Yeah.
What did you guys do this water? started something.
Conversations like this.
What's your name, sorry? Diana. Lindsay.
He went to Babson actually. He went to
Oh, that's the, yeah. I was like, yeah, it started with a B.
Yes.
And I couldn't recall it. Because I only know, I think I only know 2 people who live in Babson.
Yeah, we're cool.
Yeah, they're super funny. He said, where'd you guys go?
Are you from here?
Yeah, but I'm
Oh, are you Matt?
Yeah. What about you?
I went to Babson. I graduated in 2015.
Oh, okay.
What are you interested in?
Huh?
What are you interested in doing, I guess?
Sustainability. What about you? I do a lot of people stuff.
So,
Managing?
yeah.
People operations.
Yeah, this is like experience, all this stuff. And then a lot of like event planning.
Oh, cool. Do you work over here?
Yeah.
South Station. South Station. Oh, that's super convenient.
Yeah.
Yes, I live in Marshall.
Lindsay, I actually know you because I know your wife. Yeah. Yeah, where did I meet her? At an event.
That's all they meet at an ACE event.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, actually, no, Vincent's book signing.
Oh, book
Yeah,
signing,
because I'm
yeah.
friends with Vincent, so. Oh, yeah, they told me that you like ballroom dancing. And I also like salsa. So, yeah, it's great. I kind of stopped just because, like, it's hard for me to get to places, but where I live, I have a dance studio. So I used to take classes on, like,
All right, good evening, everyone.
salsa.
We're going to get started in a moment, so if you want to grab anything to eat or drink. I'm just going to ask because the rain probably delayed a number of people for everyone to
No, you have to learn everything.
You can come up front a little bit.
Yeah, but that's what I learned from the ceiling. Yes, yeah.
In front of it. Okay, well, good evening. Welcome. Thank you for coming to ACE Next Gen's Women in Early Stage Investing and Diversity event. My name is CL Tan. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Women's Initiative, and I'm really excited to put on this event with the rest of the ACE team and some of our great sponsors tonight. And before we get started, I just want everyone to know that this is being live streamed. So if you're on social media and you want to share the link, it's bit.ly/ACENG 7/17/19 panel. Okay. And so welcome to everyone who's joining us online across the country. Thank you for being here. And I just want to say a couple things about ACE and then introduce our sponsors and then introduce our panelists who I know that you came all the way from wherever you came from to see and hear speak. So ACE Next Gen is an organization under the National Asian American Chamber of Commerce and Entrepreneurship. And our commitment is to support the next generation of Asian-owned businesses, Asian Pacific Islander-owned businesses. And one of our commitments, we have 2 groups of businesses that we support: traditional businesses, Main Street businesses, as well as venture-backed businesses. So this event is really focused on that because what we found is overall for Asian businesses, they're not funded as much, especially women-owned. So we really want to create some parity there and empower our members and others in our community. And I also want to introduce our generous event host, the space host tonight and sponsor, GSV Labs. So, Kara, if you want to say a couple things.
So welcome. So I'll just give you guys a little bit of background of GSV Labs and who we are. So we are a global innovation platform. We're actually headquartered in Silicon Valley. So GSV stands for Global Silicon Valley. Our mission is to accelerate startups and connect corporations to innovative business models, ideas, and technologies. Our Boston location opened in March of last year. We have 45 early stage startups in a variety of verticals such as ed tech, digital health, memberships, including one that we just launched recently called GSV Passport, which allows entrepreneurs anywhere in the globe to access this platform through online. So if you have any questions, please find me after. I'll be around. My name is Kara, and I'm really excited for the panel.
Okay, thank you, Kara. And then our other sponsor is the Affinity Project, and they're the ones hosting and sponsoring the live stream tonight. So they are a social platform that allows people to gather and have anonymous but intimate campfire conversations around shared content. So rather than having monologues in the way that current live streaming enables, people are actually able to have dialogue without the burden of kind of preemptively assuming what they can or cannot say with each other. The idea being to generate community conversations. So it's not necessarily relevant to people here, but everyone who's joining us on live stream, that's who you're working with. And the thing that you came for tonight, I have the distinct privilege of introducing our panelists. So I want to make sure I don't miss anything of your accolades. Exactly. So to my very right, Baiyin Murphy. So she is the founder and principal at Pulse Ventures, which focuses on early growth stage enterprise tech focused companies. And prior to that, she actually launched this with some partners at Ascent Venture Partners, and has a long history in working in venture capital. In addition to that, because what I'm discovering is investors are very multifaceted individuals, and you'll hear more about that. She is also extremely committed to sustainable business practices. So she spends her efforts leading Net Impact, which is a nonprofit impacting that area, and is a docent at the Museum of Fine Arts, is on the board of the New England Venture Network. So maybe one day when we're at the MFA, we might see you. Give a tour? Yep, so don't be a stranger. And then we also have Jennifer Mendoza, who is the founder and general partner of Mendoza Ventures, and it's a Boston-based pre-seed fintech, AI, and cybersecurity venture capital firm. So for those of you who aren't familiar with them, they're really an innovative and diverse team. And what we were sharing about and what I learned is that founders actually have a very different experience in working with them as they do with kind of your more traditional firm. And she is a published author, very committed to diversity. She speaks a lot. You might have seen her in other venture capital related events, and really, really thrilled to have her. So they're gonna speak a lot more to what it is that they're doing and on this topic. And really for tonight, the environment that I'm committed to creating is a really honest conversation. So imagine, it might take a little bit, but imagine that we're sitting in a very large living room with ducks up top, right, and a large TV. But really that's the kind of nature of conversation we want to have. And we'll start with some questions that I ask them, but we're quickly kind of transition to a back and forth Q&A with everyone sitting in the audience. So, any questions that you want to get answered, this is the opportunity to. There's no wrong question. It's only designed to empower you as founders and you as people who work with startups. Okay? All right. So, first question. Just to give people a little bit more background, can you speak to more about your firm and philosophy and kind of what type of companies that you work with and look to work with?
Do you hear me? Okay, perfect. So our firm philosophy, what we focus on. So focus for us is a really big word. It's really important. It's actually something that I advise a lot of the companies that I work with to do, is that you can do so many things. There's a million different paths. They lead you to other million different paths. And I really truly believe that you can't be great at anything if you're trying to do everything. So especially when you're first starting out. But I think, generally, focusing on one thing and doing it really, really well is important. So our firm, Pulse Ventures, takes on that same philosophy, is that
we only make one type of investment. And the type of investment that we make is early growth stage enterprise tech companies based in the Northeast. So there's a lot to unpack there. We oftentimes spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs trying to, show them what we mean by early growth stage, all of those things, and we can get into that later. But that's what we do. That's all of us have done at the firm, and that's what we know best. So what that also means is that, if you're a consumer business trying to do a social media play or a clean tech firm, like, I don't think we'd be the best investor for you. We don't do that type of stuff. So that's one thing. And then the second thing that is relatively unique for us is that we make really high conviction, concentrated bets. So instead of investing in a ton of companies in which I have to sit on 10 or 15 boards, instead we're being very disciplined about only investing in one new company per person per year. So our portfolio ends up being a lot smaller, but we get to spend a lot more time with our companies and our entrepreneurs. And because we're only investing in the Northeast, we're very close to them, and we think that that's what allows us to get the sort of return profiles and risk profiles that we bring to our investors. So that's sort of a quick highlight on what we do. Thank you.
I can't believe that this is the first time that we're meeting because we do really similar things. So very similar, we do pre-seed and seed stage only. We are location agnostic, so our portfolio companies are right now in London, Portland, Maine, Austin, Texas, and Boston. Not all of them. And we have a small fund in terms of VC life, so we have a $10 million fund. And we have 3 general partners, so each general partner is usually in charge of about 4 to 5 companies at a time. We opened in 2016 with the investment thesis of proactively raising capital from sources that can help companies scale. So our LP base is largely experiential, and that's what we give our founders. So we give them the cell phone number of someone that scaled something similar 2 years ago who's now an LP in our fund. And that we have found creates a very different dynamic because the people who are coming in to help the companies literally have skin in the game. And it creates an atmosphere of camaraderie where people are all willing to roll up their sleeves and help each other out.
Awesome, thank you. So now, given how unique you guys are in the kind of local industry, or maybe the industry at large, can you actually speak to the Boston market? What are the trends, funding trends, what are founders seeing out there, and what are investors and your colleagues talking about or interested in? Can you speak to the high level, and then we'll start from high and then get into the details?
Yeah, sure. So what we've been experiencing is that there's been a ton of capital rushing into the growth stage and the late stage venture. You're seeing $100 million venture rounds being announced almost every single day, which used to be a rarity. You're seeing private equity groups dipping down into venture capital to try to invest in tech companies that just haven't gone public. The public markets have really only recently opened up. Companies have been staying private for a lot longer than what we're used to seeing. So there's just a lot of capital, on the very late stages. And then we're also seeing a lot more, and particularly in Boston, a lot more seed stage funds being formed. I think about 10x or so, and I think that's because, particularly in Boston, we actually have a pretty long history of venture capital. We have firms like Charles River Ventures, now called CRV, for a particular reason, and Battery Ventures, Bessemer, a lot of venture capital firms being started here, focused here, and have over time, moved their focus over to the West Coast, right? And so as a result, the partners who are at those firms who don't want to focus on the West Coast or want to do smaller
deals are, spinning out and raising seed stage funds, which I think is amazing for our ecosystem because, when you want to create an entrepreneurial ecosystem, you really need these seed and angel investors, which I think we haven't had a lot of because all the firms have sort of been growing and growing and kind of getting bigger and bigger. And so that's generally kind of what I'm seeing here. And I think that we have several industries, and I apologize, I don't know much about consumer tech, I only know about enterprise tech, and so within enterprise tech, I think our amazing universities have created a long kind of standing list of IP, talent, companies that are really focused. I think we're really strong in AI and robotics, obviously life sciences, biotech, we're kind of the top market for that. So that's kind of generally some trends that I'm seeing.
I'll back you up on the seed stage trending. I think that one of the things to be aware of is that, like all industries, there's a lot of theater in venture capital. And so A rounds used to be $1 million to $3 million on up from there. And now they're starting at about $5 or $6 million, but they're still called A rounds. So I would ask, if you're looking for funding, how they're defining the stage, because I'm seeing a lot of seed funds come out of larger venture capital firms that are looking for A-round metrics at the seed stage. So I think what's happening is, basically it's cool to be the kid that's in first, right? So VCs keep moving their stages up too, so that we can say like, we're an A-round VC when really like it's a little bit bigger and more solid of an investment at that point and a little bit less risky. So I think that some of that theater is coming into play too, but like us and Pulse are really doing seed stage, and it can feel like you're the only man out there sometimes.
And we're not doing seed stage, so
Yeah.
we're a little bit bigger than where you guys are.
Yeah, and so so I would ask the firms how they're defining it, because those terms are not registered with the SEC like our funds are, and so there's a lot of wiggle room in there. I think that the other thing that's trending is supporting your CEOs in whatever form that VC firm is able to do it, and I think that that's a great trend. And each firm has their own culture about how they go about that. Some of them have like programs that they put them through. Some of them have mentorship opportunities. It depends on the VC. And the other thing that's trending is diversity. I think, like all things, there's a lot of theater there too, and so I would interview back to see what that looks like of people that you're approaching.
Great. Now, if we sit next to you, shoulder to shoulder, right, on a day-to-day basis, can you share a little bit more of like, how many deals come across your desk? What does that look like? What do you focus on when you're looking to make your decision one way or another? Just a little bit more insight on how you start to make the decision-making process.
So I usually say no to about 150 to 200 people before we invest in one. We joke that I say no for a living. You can save me a lot of that work though by Googling what we do before you meet us. Like we don't do consumer tech, so look at your VCs and make sure that you're a fit for them before you approach them. And then we have 3 general partners. We have myself, Adrian Mendoza, and Pong Choa. All 3 of us have to agree on the investment in order to invest in that company. And that process is 3 to 6 months of working alongside with the company before we cut the check. So we have a longer diligence road than most venture capital firms, but we are literally at the riskiest sector of the riskiest part of the economy, and this is how we de-risk it. And if in 3 to 6 months that's a deal breaker, we don't see that as a solid investment.
So we're at the early growth stage. We're writing checks between $3 to $5 million, and so I probably see about 1,000 companies a year. And as I mentioned to you all, I will only do 1 deal a year, and our firm has 4 investing people, so we'll do like 4 deals a year. So yeah, it's a really low hit rate. What else can I say differently from what you have? Yeah, we also tend to have a pretty involved due diligence process for us, and you'll see. And I think with seed stage firms, it's rare to find a firm that's spending
all this time on due diligence, I was actually having coffee with a friend at another pretty well-known Boston seed stage fund, and they've come to a first meeting with a term sheet in hand, which I was blown away by. So different firms operate very differently. I think we probably have very similar philosophies. For us, we have actually never not closed a deal in which we signed a term sheet. So what does that mean? That means that we don't give term sheets out just like willy-nilly, right? There are some firms out there that use the term sheet as a way to kick everyone else out of the process, and then they do their work, and then by that point, they don't have they have all the leverage, right? And the entrepreneur doesn't. So for us, we also tend to have a very disciplined kind of due diligence process, and we try to be very open with the entrepreneur about what that entails and what our sticking points might be, so that we can, as efficiently as possible, kind of, suss out all the issues on the front end. Because I think, given that people like to joke that, VC's jobs are to say no, I think the best situation is if you get a no quickly rather than slowly. That's like the worst possible thing. It's like someone drags you out, asks you for like all this data, and then at the end they're like, no, for this reason that you're thinking you knew this all along, right? That just sucks.
So actually on that topic, I hear a lot of founders, express frustration at, okay, what is actually a no, right? So from where you sit and where your colleagues sit, how is it, is it, no, but come back to me when you have a lead investor? Is that a no? How does a founder determine what's actually a no and how to get there faster?
How do they determine if something's a no? Okay, please.
No or a not right now?
It's a lot like dating. Like if it's not a yes, it's a no. Like if someone says, come back to me when you have a car, you should not go out with that person, right? So if they're saying, come back to me when you have a lead term sheet, so VCs have their own rules, and some people systemically do not want to lead around because crazy people do the amount of diligence that me and my team do on a startup, and they don't want to carry that overhead of doing all the research and all that stuff. So they only do what's called a follow-on, and they basically like invest a lot of little, we call them bets, but investments in several different companies across the board, and they don't do that section of it. Unless that's part of their thesis and they say, come back to me when you have a lead investor, usually it's a very polite way of saying no thank you.
Great, so given that, how early or, when in the process should founding teams start to approach you and start developing a relationship? What's too early, what's too late? And I think this will be very interesting because you guys are at different stages of the growth process. So if you could speak to that, I think that would be very helpful.
Yeah, I think it's so easy for VCs to just say like, oh, come talk to me when you're not raising. But the reality is you have other things to do. Like, why are you gonna spend all your time? Would you rather meet with a customer, or would you rather meet with a VC when you're not raising? Like, you probably want the customer, right? So I think the practical advice I would give is always budget more time for your fundraise than what you think. So if you think your fundraise is gonna take 6 months, don't start reaching out to VCs at 6 months. Start reaching out to them at 9 months or 12 months. So that's my first piece of advice. And the second one is, while you're not fundraising, there will be investors that are kind of ahead of your stage that cold email you and want to meet you. And if you have the time, I would say take those meetings. And that's sort of how you develop relationships with VCs, because those are probably the ones that they reach out to you for a reason, right? They probably have a thesis around your space, and they have some analyst or associate kind of, look for all the companies in that space. So there's some interest, and that's why they kind of reach out to you. And if you have the time, take that meeting. I wouldn't, when you're focused on building your business, have like a list of VCs to cold email just in case you need them for the next round. And then, all those relationships you start accumulating over time, and you just keep in touch with them. And then when you combine those two strategies, I think you can get a pretty good list. I don't know if you have a different perspective being at the seed stage.
No, I think it's the same thing. I mean, we always say we'll have coffee with anybody. So, because there's best practices practices that you can put in place at any stage of a company. But I would also say take the meetings, but make sure that they're productive ones for you. So if someone's not a good fit, there's still a VC with a VC, we call it like a Rolodex, but like that's old school. A VC's contacts list. So ask them, you know, who do you regularly partner with to get seed stage deal flow? And then you're not asking them for a check, but you're asking them for resources that can help you move the ball down the field for your company.
So now, as a founder, with all these options and kind of looking at who to develop relationships with, how does one determine which investors to approach? Besides obviously doing due diligence, reading the website, and any kind of advice that your advisors might have, how does someone make that determination?
Okay, well, I don't want to skim over the website or using the internet, because I think especially nowadays, VCs do produce some level of marketing, and you can learn a lot about what their interests and focus are through their blogs or their website or whatever. And so I think it's really important to see what sort of deals they've done in the past, and do they sort of look like yours, or if that firm has literally never done a healthcare deal and you're a healthcare company, I think that would be a little bit harder to convince them. And also looking at the backgrounds of the partners at those firms, I think is important. And you know, we actually recently did a survey of our portfolio company CEOs, like, how did you find us? How did you go, you know, how did you think about your process? And a huge percentage of them actually built their list through their network. So I don't think it should be surprising to us that, like anything else, you know, people talk, and when there's bad behavior or when there's really amazing people to work with, like the entrepreneurs will tell each other about that. And so, you know, if you're considering working with a firm, you know, go out to your network and ask them, like, have you met with them? What do you think about them? Do you think that their investing style is, you know, it matches us? And then I would definitely not, I wouldn't discount your kind of gut instinct and feel when you first meet with a VC. Like, trying to figure out whether they're a culture fit with you, whether you guys can get along, and 'cause if they end up, you know, investing in your firm, that's going to be a really, really long relationship, and there's probably going to be all sorts of issues that come up, and you need to be able to, you know, work through those issues together.
I don't think that you can emphasize enough, talk to your friends about their experiences. Usually if you have founded a startup and you're looking to raise, you're not the only person you know that's doing that at that moment. Usually you find a buddy at like your first networking event, cling to each other. Or look at people who are 2 or 3 years ahead of you in the process, someone who just raised their A round. And you'll be amazed how many people will respond to a thoughtful, cold LinkedIn request or something like that and say, hey, you know, I saw that manifest, just invested in you and I'm thinking about working with them. Do you mind giving some feedback on your process? And I can't emphasize enough what you said about making sure that they're a right fit culturally. This person will own a portion of your company. You will have a very bad day at some point in your life with this person, either in your corner or not. And you need to decide who you want to work with and who you want to surround, not only yourself, but the team that you are financing with. And so make sure that they are people that you want to learn from, that they're people that you want to grow with, and that they're people who are going to support you in this process in a way that you need to be supported. Sometimes that's just money, and great, take all the money. But at other times that is mentorship or connections, or we work a lot with enterprise sales, and you can't just cold sell to a bank if you've never done that before. A lot of people rely on their VCs for introductions. So really have a clear idea in your head of what you need and interview them back for how you imagine them filling that role.
Okay, great. Now, it touches upon I actually want to address one of the topics in the title, right? Diversity, kind of the elephant in the room sometimes. But do you find, in your experience, is there any challenges that you face as a female founder of a VC firm? She laughs, I assume that means yes. And also from the, you know, I've heard stories from, you know, female founders and founders who are people of color that they've, you know, had to deal with certain situations or have questions answered that maybe their counterparts, right, who are not diverse in a way, have not had to deal with. So anything any stories you can share about that?
I don't know if it's a story off the bat, but also, well, first of all, female founders are more rare, as you know. Female founders of VC firms, I mean, we're unicorns, which is cool, but but we are very rare. So I would also say, I think you were talking about the company, and I totally assumed when you started that you were talking about the people, but as you look at the VC firm, if they don't look like you culturally, know that. And also if the CEOs that they have funded don't look like you culturally, know that going in, and value engineer your time.
Sorry, what was the question?
Yeah, so either from
Oh, a story. Oh, got it. So I mean, unfortunately, I don't have a particular story that I can like strongly tie to any aspect of myself that's diverse. And so, you know, the obvious things, right? I'm female, I'm not white, but also age is another big one. When I looked to join my team, they hadn't hired anyone in 7 years. And they're all male, all white, all had kids. And like I'm not any of those things. And it was a really big question mark for me, you know, whether they were ready to have someone like myself on their team. And so I tried to do as much like backdoor reference checking as possible. I called their LPs, I called their CEOs, I called peers, and like sort of tried to ask, but you can't, no one really knows, right? It's really hard to tell before you join. And so I just got really lucky that I have an incredibly supportive team. And so you don't really know, but I think something that kind of stands out even more actually to me is my age. I'm kind of younger than everyone else, and I'm also oftentimes, I'm younger than my admins. I'm also oftentimes younger than the CEOs that we're backing, right? And so there's all sorts of kind of ways that you can be different and stand out. And I actually kind of use that to my advantage. Like I know that when I'm in a room with somebody, they're gonna remember me. Because my name's strange. Like now that I'm married, I have a stranger name than what it used to be. Irish name. You know, I'm usually the only female VC that they might have met and all those things. And so kind of using that to your advantage, I think, can be a really powerful thing. I'm now just starting to go through the fundraising process myself. And I feel for you guys, like it is like a really, really tough road. And the LP community is also not very diverse. And moreover, they don't seem to, you know, and you talk about theatrics and VC, right? Like there are a lot of venture capital firms now, like with the Me Too movement that are like, oh yeah, we have diversity initiatives right now or whatever. And some of it is real, some of it isn't. Like the LP community actually doesn't care. They don't really have that. I've spoken to a lot of female-founded VC friends who their entire LP base is white male. It's crazy. Like they're a female VC firm only investing in female founders, and all their LPs are male. So I'm now starting to like get those experiences, and I'm like very aware of what I look like. But yeah, we'll see how that shakes out.
So my co-founders, one is a Mexican-American man, the other one's a Chinese-American man. And we joke about LP meetings, like, who will do the least damage walking into this room? Because we stand out a little bit. But I have to say, one of the nice things, because we announced our fund in late September, so we've been actively fundraising and hang in there, like, you got this.
It will end.
Yeah, it will end, it's good. And one of the nice things is that, like, we don't try and hide what we look like, but also, like, we can't. And so our LPs have self-selected a lot. I also have young children. They're 5 and 7, they're awesome. But we had an event where they were there. We had a taco night and a bunch of our LPs were coming, and a friend was on the elevator and had texted me, and I poised my children to tackle him when he got off of the elevator, not knowing that he was on the elevator with 5 of our LPs. So my friend and 5 investors in our fund got off of the elevator and literally were tackled by my 2 screaming children, and I stood there horrified. But they know what they're getting into, and they have all been great advocates of us. And so I think that the nice thing about having a diverse founded team is that you surround yourself really naturally with like-minded people, and that happens.
So if we look at the trends in how much or who the venture funding went to like last year, right? The numbers to women-led companies and to people of color founders-led companies, relatively low, pretty low. In your perspective, what do you think would it take, both from like a pipeline perspective for founders and also from your community, to alter those numbers to create a little bit more parity?
I mean, my immediate answer to that is that we need more women writing checks. That's what's going to fix it. And so we need more women in decision-making positions in venture capital writing big checks.
Right? Which we do.
So you don't see it as a pipeline issue from the starter's perspective, like not having enough female-led companies looking for funding?
I think it's tricky to talk about it as a pipeline issue because that's a really easy scapegoat for venture capitalists. And I think it's a multifaceted issue. I have a 5-year-old Latina daughter. So it's something that starts in pre-K and lasts through post-grad, because there's a lot of financial risk involved in founding a company, that if you're making 75% of the income of your peers, you're less well positioned to take. At every stage of decision making in a woman's life, there is 3 things working against her to stop her from starting a startup. And financial access is one of them. It's a big one. Education's one of them, like every single moment. And so yes, there is something of a pipeline issue, but at the same time, it's not like MIT isn't cranking out female engineers at this point. And so I think, yes, I have found less women come to me with companies. Our answer to that pipeline issue has been to give women more. So to meet with them at an earlier stage, to be more proactive about introducing them to other people, to take the extra cup of coffee, to take the extra meeting, to hand out my cell phone number more freely. I don't know if that's moving the needle in a proactive way. That's been our solution to moving the needle, and my male partners do that as well. That's the best idea that we've been able to come up with yet, other than like our daughter just bought the Captain Marvel comic book. Like those are the 2 things I've done this week to try and move it.
Yeah, I totally agree that it's a very complicated issue. There are things I can beat on like every single level. You talked about, from being a child and all the different influences that can happen there. But also, at the board level, right? When you look around a board of directors room, I'm usually the only board member that's a female. There's some companies where there's some other, and this includes when they're executives at these meetings. They're not board members, but they are at these meetings, and so it happens at the very top too. And there are organizations out there that are trying to get more women to board seats, but oftentimes, like, what are board members, right? They're usually executives with many years of experience at very large, impressive companies. What percentage of those people are female? Lower as well. So on like every single level, there's still a lot of work to do, but I think there are amazing people trying to fix kind of all different aspects of it. I was just at a little get together with the founder of Elevest, which I'm sure many of you guys have heard about, and her perspective is that money is power, and women will never have power until we make
as much money as men. And so her whole thing is that we need to get women more financially savvy. And, you know, what kind of person is usually out there starting a VC fund or being a board member? Typically people who have more money. There are fewer women who have more money. It's like there's so many things going on. But to your question, yeah, we should be thinking to ourselves as VCs, what can we do to fix a little part of it? It won't fix all of it, but how can we make it slightly better? Having people at the firms writing checks that look like, you know, what our population looks like is one of them. You know, encouraging VCs to do things to open up their pipeline is another one. There's all sorts of things that, you know, I think we can do, and I also think entrepreneurs can do things that try to help themselves. There's a study done where I think, like, I'm gonna get part of this wrong, but I guess when VCs meet with males, whether the VC is a woman or a man, they tend to ask males questions that are more like visionary, and visionary answers and questions tend to get funded. Whereas if a VC were to meet with a woman, they ask defensive questions like, you know, why aren't you executing? Like, why are you so limited in your market size? And when pitches tend to be more defensive, there's a lower chance of them getting funded, right? And so knowing that data and knowing that whether the VC is a woman or a man, this is still the same pattern. Maybe as a founder, you can think about, okay, if someone's asking me a defensive question, there are things you can do to turn that around so that you're now talking about vision, you're not talking about the big idea. So I think like everyone can sort of acknowledge that this is a reality, like what can we do to give ourselves the best chance?
And that's really great. If there's any more of those kind of strategies or things to be responsible for, right, while you're out as a founder, if you guys can speak to that.
I'm working really closely with a female founder right now, and we've been in a couple pitches together recently. And our first 2 investments were male founders. One of them had a female co-founder, in my defense. And I'm bringing her to friends that have invested in our companies before, and I've noticed that the questions are different, and I've been floored by it because I was not expecting it. And so I think one of the things to remember is that most sexism is unconscious. I don't know a lot of men that get out of bed in the morning and say, I'm gonna really put a girl down today. Like, luckily for us, that is not a popular mindset. And so usually the people that you're talking to aren't aware that they're doing it. And so what we've done as a strategy is try and proactively educate them to where her company is at in comparison to other successful companies that they have invested in at the point at which they invested. So like if you look at our MRR, we're right at the point that you invested in this other company and that was a really good deal for you. You should totally invest with us. That kind of pivoting it in that way has been really helpful to help them draw the parallels that they're not going to do on their own.
So what were some of those questions that they were asked that you were surprised by? Can you give some examples?
She is a driven founder, and I've been asked by every single VC that we've met if she's too aggressive. And I was like, yes. Yes, she is. I love her. So am I. Have we met? And that was surprising to me, I guess. I was like, you're a VC. Like, why is this a question? You're obviously aggressive, too. That was one. And the defensiveness, I noticed. Like, oh, instead of being like, good job, you got a customer, it's like, oh, your MRR is only here. And I was like,
why don't you have more customers?
yeah, why don't you have more customers? I'm like, because her sales guy got hired like 4 weeks ago and he barely knows where the bathroom is. Like, that's why, give us 2 more weeks.
No, thank you. Now I want to open it up to you guys. You know, I think we've covered a range of areas, but I imagine that you've come with some questions of your own. So don't be shy. If you have a question, just raise your hand, and we want to get as many people's questions or concerns or comments addressed as we can. Who'd like to go? Miracle?
If you just stand up. Okay.
Yeah.
So we go back to pitch that you will be most interested in, or have you met any per-sale pitch that in your like investing histories?
Yeah, I can go first. Well, before like getting into specifics of a pitch deck, I think that it's important to know that when you're giving a pitch, you're telling a story, and storytelling is really important to sell anybody, right? So obviously you have to be honest, but you should be telling a story about your company that is compelling and that tailors to the person that you're talking to. And if your pitch deck can help you tell that story in a really kind of clear and concise way, I think that's the best thing. And then I don't know if you're looking for advice on like what things need to be in that pitch deck. I think it might be a little bit different depending on the stage that you're in. For us, you know, we always want to hear why instead of going to work for Google or IBM, you decided to take all this risk to do this thing. So what kind of brought you there, right? And what team have you formed to solve this issue? How you're solving this issue in a way that is different and better than other people. So why will you win? And then how are you gonna win? So, you know, how are you going to market? What kind of people, customers are you targeting? This again is all like enterprise type stuff. And then, you know, basic metrics and financials if you have them. That's like sort of like broadly things that we want to understand. But I think most important is like this all needs to come together in a story, because a lot of investors you meet with might not, they're definitely not going to know your company as deeply as you do, right? And you just have to get them excited and interested enough to say, okay, this like follows some sort of pattern recognition for me, I want to know more.
I think also we work in a financial industry, and so a deck is telling the story of like, I am going to complete this massive task, like scaling Mount Everest, right? Okay, but if you need my money to scale Mount Everest, how much of it do you need and when am I going to get it back? Because I have 10 people on my desk that want to scale Mount Everest. So answer those questions of like, why you? Why? And there's a lot of really good articles out there that help you structure this story. But I think that you hit the nail on the head that it needs to be a good, consistent, engaging, realistic story.
Yeah, and another point that I think I'd love to highlight from what you just said, and something that won't serve you well is if you are not, you have to like put a stake to the ground and you have to have an ask. There are a number of entrepreneurs out there who they're afraid of like putting a timeline down, or they're afraid of saying, I need $2 million, right? Because they want to appeal to more investors. And so they'd rather be like more wishy-washy and say, hey, what do you think? You tell me. Like, I don't think that's a good idea at all. I think it's better to say, this is my goal, like I would like to, you know, investors gonna say, what's your timeline? Where are you in your process, right? And instead of saying, oh, you know, we're open, just, you know, having conversations, what's gonna register in the VC's mind is, oh, well, this isn't a high priority. I have, you know, 2 deals that need a decision by next Monday, so I'm gonna work on those, and then I'll forget about yours, right? So instead, be really clear, put a stake on the ground. If it doesn't work out, the VC is likely gonna forget that you even set that timeline, but also it's fine to say, hey, like we needed more time, or we, you know, started looking for other types of investors, whatever, and saying, this is how much money I need. And if you're not a good fit, like I'm gonna go to someone else.
But also like make sure that that stake is a real one. Because I've totally had people be like, well, we're gonna close in 2 weeks. And I'm like, okay, I'll talk to you in 2 weeks. And yet remarkably, like week 3, they're like, funny thing. It actually takes a year to raise any amount of money, and I learned that in the past 2 weeks.
Someone else? Another question?
Have you ever done outreach to a company where you feel so compelled by what they're doing that you actually spin the tables and go after them?
Yeah,
And
all
what
the time.
made them different
usually in situations like that, it's because I've formed a thesis around something that they're doing, and I've done a ton of work in research. I've talked to a lot of companies, and I've kind of honed in on yours. And then when I met with you, like, I was just so impressed. We always do due diligence, so there will not be a situation where we're like, here's a term sheet the first time I met with you. But they're absolutely, like, every VC has a list, like a short list of companies where they're like, I would love to fund that company or a company that looks like that. And yeah, and it usually comes from a place of like being very well researched. There are other VC firms that like, and especially the growth stage folks who are like, oh, this is really hyped up. Like everyone talks about this Boston company. I'm sure you guys can name like the 5 Boston companies that like, they host all these events and everyone always talks about them, and you know, they have like celebrity CEOs, whatever. That's different. And you'll see the big firms just say, I don't care what it takes, I will put money into this company. At our stages, that doesn't tend to happen as much.
And usually that's thank you money for like the 2 companies that came before that made them a celebrity CEO.
Right. Yeah.
I haven't chased anyone down really aggressively yet, but we've gotten to maybe Greg Siegel from Alice. We chased him a little bit in the beginning, but it was really early. It was before he was like one of the cool kids in Boston, and long before. I mean, we're not cool yet. We're still working on it. But the nice thing is that when you open up a venture capital firm, people like to bring new deals. And so we were laughing that like whatever company we want to open next, we're going to call it something ventures, because people just like bring you stuff. So we have a lot of advocates that know us really well. Seth at GSB Labs is a really good one, that brings us deals as they see companies out there. So we've had a really healthy pipe in that way.
Another question?
When you invest in a company, you champion them, and money is power, and that's the thing we talked about, women and the power that we have a discomfort in acknowledging that we have power, and then when we invest in a company, whether it is money or skills or something like that, we're championing them and what they are doing, their impact. So I'd love to hear your experiences of a company you really believed in and fought for, and what they are doing, what it is that really you will do about them.
Well, I just talked about Greg, and I think that he's a really good example of this, because I don't know if anybody here knows Alice, but it's ALYCE, and they're a corporate gifting company, and they're just cool. They were literally our first investment, so we have a really close relationship with them because we literally like grew up together. And so recently so what they do is they send you a corporate gift that's tailored to you. So they have an AI engine that searches you up on the internet, and like Charlotte, I'm gonna throw you under the bus. Let's say that I want to thank Charlotte for being an amazing intern, and I want to give her a gift. So instead of sending her like a basket of pears or something, it would Google Charlotte, and it would be like, Charlotte likes boats, and she works in Boston, and she's in college, so here's a back to school survival kit, and here's a cruise for 2 on Boston Harbor, and here's like a pretty picture of a boat for your office, right? So it's a tailored thing. They recently partnered with Artists for Humanity, and I'm going to forget that there's another nonprofit that they partnered with that helps homeless and underserved population artists to do all of their gift boxes and things like that. And they don't know this, but my undergrad was in community action through artwork at UMass, and so I was like, yes! I was like, put that money to good use. And they also have a people first community that they've built that's been really beautiful to watch that core value grow in a really meaningful way.
Yeah, and so I think like what I take away from your story is that you know, she felt like a really personal connection to that company or that team or their mission. And so you guys should take advantage of the internet and figure out like what that personal connection might be between you and this VC, right? Like things are gonna resonate for different people for the most random reasons. At the end of the day, like business is very emotional. Like this happens in sales all the time. And so being able to make that connection with someone, like no matter how random it is, I think can really, really help you. You know, for me, I have like two stories I can think of. One is this company based in New York called Splash. And you guys, I'm sure, have come across Splash in some way. They do these beautiful kind of landing pages. It's like an Eventbrite, but like beautiful landing pages. That's kind of the consumer-facing part of it. And for me, like I feel like a huge advocate and a huge cheerleader for this company because I actually tried to convince my prior firm twice to invest in it. And there are many reasons why we didn't, but you know, one of which, you know, had to do with the fact that, you know, it's a relatively young founder, and it was kind of his first time doing that. And when I was interviewing to join the team that I'm with now, you know, one of the GPs was like, "Oh, I'm so excited! I just closed this deal with this company," loosely described, and I was like, "Oh my God, it's Splash!" And he's like, "Yeah, it is." And I was so excited, and so a little bit of that is like, I like had conviction. I knew it, and I like couldn't convince my prior team to do it. Now this team is, but also the other part of it is that this founder, he's really, really special. He's actually from Massachusetts, and he acts, you know, like a very typical millennial. He's like, he has a million things going on. He like goes to Burning Man. He like, you know, he like does all these like quirky things. And when you first meet him, especially, you know, my GP who's in his late 40s with like kids and like a finance guy, you're like, how did he, you know, meet this really young, like redheaded kid and say, okay, yeah, I can be his board member, I can work with him. But, you know, he did, and he believed in him. And I kind of felt like, yeah, like I believed in this kid. This kid could have been me. And so I feel that sort of like weird connection with him, and he's been incredibly successful. Like this company is crushing it, and he's built an amazing team around him. He knew that there are things that he just wasn't good at. For example, like detail-oriented, like analytical things. He just can't like pay attention for long enough to like do it. So he hired people who were amazing at that. And, you know, oftentimes, you know, as companies kind of go through different stages, the founders are no longer the right people to be running the business. It's a very kind of natural thing. The whole Mark Zuckerberg thing is very rare. And so with this company, like, you probably wouldn't have been surprised if that's what happened, but it hasn't, because he's been very kind of self-aware. He's surrounded himself with people who complement him very well.
So I have a follow-up question. So when you look at teams or founders, what are the qualities that you value?
I think you hit the nail on the head with self-awareness. That's a big one. Like, you have to know what you're good at and what you're bad at, and be able to talk to people who are good at what you're bad at. And if you can't do those things, you should not be in a leadership position. You should just do something.
Yeah, I agree.
I think that's huge. And also, we work with our founders for 3 to 6 months, and before we invest, and part of the reason that we do that is that time kind of tells all things. And so at that point in a startup, you've had at least one day go not the way you planned for it to go. And so we look at how they react to those conditions, and if their reaction is to blame it on the team around them, or we always say a bad sailor blames the weather, right? A good sailor makes it home. If they're gonna blame it on the weather instead of their own ability or their own like ability to navigate the moment, then it's not a fit.
And in enterprise tech, for us, it's also like we don't tend to invest in folks who like, you know, college, like really, really young, like inexperienced. I think there's a lot of successful kind of founders and CEOs, particularly in other industries, where that works out, and that's great. I think in enterprise tech, when you're doing enterprise sales, there's a lot of value in having worked in a professional setting before, knowing how to interact with really large customers, right? You're this tiny startup, knowing how to interact with like a big bank, for example. So having that experience and having experienced the pain of what you're trying to solve are things that we kind of generally look for. And then, close to what you're saying, we also end up spending a lot of casual time with the team. We'll do dinners, we'll do drinks and things like that because we want to both understand like where they came from, what their motivation is. I think that tells you a lot about a person, a lot about whether they can survive a lot of things that is going to happen when you're building a startup. And also how they are as a person. So like we're talking about all this stuff and I'm realizing, oh my God, how does anyone get funded? Because you're just getting like interviewed and inspected at every single point in time. And it's because like, this is like a marriage you can get divorced and get out of.
But you can't divorce the
You
startup.
can't divorce your VC. You really can't. Like they own a piece of you until like you can make the money. So or the other way around. So
that's our new VC tagline. We own a piece of you.
It's scary, and then like you give more and more of yourself away to other VCs. It's awful. But one anecdote is that we were very close to issuing a term sheet with a company, and so we had dinner with the CEO as we usually do, and he was incredibly rude to the waitress. Like just completely snapped at her, like made a mountain out of a molehill, and that was enough for us to walk away. So just kind of think about that. For like some people might think like, really? Like, it's an amazing company. Like, what if it was the next pick a company? If you look at, especially when you talk to VCs who have done this for like 20 years, like it makes a huge difference. And I will also tell you that for VCs that have done this for a really long time, they would rather not get the big return on capital with a terrible person. They would rather get the lower multiple and work with someone that is a good human being to work with. Because we're working with these companies for a really long time.
Are we telling like horror stories? Let's make it like a campfire, and I'm like, it was a dark and spooky night.
I think we would love horror stories.
Yeah. This was like, so I think part of what you're touching on too is that like you end up like being challenged together, and if that's someone who's gonna yell at a person, like that person's gonna be you or someone else in the company, and that just doesn't make like good companies. So we were about to invest in a company. They sent me the final like term sheet on Friday. I was reading it over the weekend, and it was 2 female founders. I was really excited. And they published a Me Too article over the weekend on their LinkedIn. And in the article, the CTO of the company had said, we can't get funded because we're women. And I was like, I'm holding a term sheet, and you just publicly said that you can't fund your company. Like, well, now I can't fund you because A, you went rogue, and we're a team. Like, we work together with our companies. I was incredibly sorry that she had had the negative experience with other VCs in the past that she had. I hope that experience wasn't with us. I don't think it was. I was always with them. But it wasn't with us. And I also work with an army of really good guys. And she had been working with them too. And I could not invest in this company without implicating us or without implicating the male CEOs I had introduced her to support her. It was just a hornet's nest of issues. So I called them to talk this through, and they said, well, what would it take for you to invest? And I said, I think you'd have to fire your CTO, because this was not CTO-ish in the beginning. And second of all, if you're not, I understand if you're not willing to take down the article, it's your personal experience, but that article being up, I can't invest in you. You've put me in a position that I cannot write this check this weekend. And I was called sexist for not writing the check, which is fine, they might be right. I made the best decision in the moment that I thought for the entire company and our entire portfolio of companies. It may or may not have been the right decision. I think it was. But that was like the waitress situation where I was like, this is so telling, and I'm finding out now. And why? And also, like, we'd had so many good meetings. I was like, there's so many good guys, you know, like, I'm sorry that this happened, but write about the good ones too. You know, like, talk about the guys who also stepped in and tried to help champion you. And that was, because good and bad both happen in the world. And that was like gut-wrenching. That one was hard.
Any other question?
Can I ask a question from the like legal perspective? When you decide to invest in a startup business, do you tend to use your own in-house legal counsel, or you will let the startup founder use their outside counsel? And what is the interplay between the two parties about their different legal counsels?
Yeah, both are involved. So our lawyers work with their lawyers. Yeah, and sometimes after we've done the deal, we'll be like, your lawyers weren't very good, let's upgrade your lawyers.
Yeah, that happens. I also usually recommend that the founder get a lawyer, because you're hiring the lawyer for your company to look out for your company.
Yeah.
You also need someone to look out for you. Like, so we learned this one the hard way with our first startup, because we didn't know about like the valuation and capital gains and that whole thing. And so we had to like create a trust for our shares in the company overnight, because we did a next round of funding and the amount of money that we owned in that company had gone up, and so you get taxed. And we didn't know that, and we would have gotten hit with like a $40,000 tax bill, us personally, not the company, like our family that was like putting kids through preschool barely on a startup salary. So we found another cheaper lawyer and had a trust made like really quickly. So get a lawyer to look out for your interests as a founder as well, because you need to make sure that you're making healthy financial decisions for you and your community, whoever that is, as well as the startup.
So further to that, what about the founder that just cannot afford any attorney, so they are asking you to help them to pay for the attorney fees?
Don't ever let a VC's attorney speak for you. It's you're tripping over a dime to pick up a nickel, essentially. And there are a lot of very friendly law firms in Boston that are super aware of startups, and so what a lot of them will do, they will defer the costs until closing, so you won't have to pay the bill for the lawyer until you raise your funding round and close it. And then you pay the lawyer out of the money that you just raised.
Thank you for the stories. I really appreciated the color, and I love the handwriting you got. It's always nice, you know, to hear the depth of it. And now I'll just ask a more specific question along the lines of what we just asked. What would be kind of like a checklist that you would say that a company needs to have these things in order to apply, in order to have the funding that they are ready for it. So having an attorney is one thing, right? Having a clear sales strategy is another. Having a financial model that's actually so that your metrics and KPI is actually based on something rather than wishful thinking, right? Which happens a lot in startups. What are some of the things that you would say the company's ready, or you would have a conversation with the company and say you're not quite ready because this and this. It just needs to be there. And it's not.
It definitely depends on what stage you're at. So different stage of investor are looking for different things. So, and I would say that especially now that there's so much capital out there, there's probably an investor for almost every situation, right?
There's an investor for every situation.
You just kind of have to find them. Do you want to do your checklist first, and then I'll kind of tack on that? Since
I mean, I think it's always good to remember that like VCs like to invest in companies and not ideas. Like ideas are great, but that is for like your mom to invest in and not like your venture capitalist. Or somebody that loves you. Which we will, but not at the first meeting. I also think different VCs have different metrics at which point they feel comfortable investing, and so be aware of what stage you're at and how much of the company you're willing to give up at that stage in order to get the next round of capital in. But it's really by case, but we always like to see you talking to someone other than your close relatives into buying this. Is like, and we are very pre-seed, so I would say everyone else likes to see a good solid 10K plus MRR before you go to them. But we like to see like MRR. So some sort of, we always say that like we look for three things: product, market, and team. So like show me that the market can support it, show me that the product can support how many users you're talking about and that you've tested that out in some way, and that the team there are these types of people that can scale something.
Yeah, and then typically investors at my stage, early growth stage, where you're looking for $3 to $5 million from us, or maybe you're doing a round of like 8 to 10 million, and there's us and a co-investor. We're typically looking for $1 to $5 million in revenue. Any sort of technology or product risk is gone. So, or most of it is not there anymore because you've commercialized your product and you've successfully been able to sell your product to customers that are paying you money. So this is after like beta customers or, half developed sort of thing, right? So you've kind of started getting early product market fit. And so what a team typically looks like is an incomplete executive team. So you will typically have, for sure CEO, maybe you'll have a head of sales, or you might have a CTO. Maybe both, but maybe not. And then after we invest, you're usually taking our money to kind of find those people and kind of build out your team. So you're kind of graduating from rock stars doing a lot of the work to, okay, this is something that I could hire anyone off the street that's a A or B player and they could do what I'm doing. At this point, usually companies have a part-time CFO, and then when we join, we'll typically ask them to hire a CFO. What else can I say? And then they're starting to try to like measure some of those front and back end unit economics and metrics and things like that.
You know how they say that 4 out of 5 startups don't get funded? That's at every stage. That's not in general for the funding that they need. That's 4 out of 5 pre-seed, and then again 4 out of 5 seed, and then 4 out of 5 A. So the metrics get more rigorous the further you go down, because if someone's writing you a $5 million check, they need to de-risk that investment for their investors. So there will be more intensive metrics at each stage.
I'm part of Ace Next Gen, and we have a member that tell a story when he was trying to get fundraising, and we talked about us with a couple people, and he got really incredibly demotivated. He's like, I'm trying to get to contact all these VCs, and nobody's returning our calls. And we're like, okay, how long have you been doing it? He's like, 2 weeks. And we're like, and we all start laughing because it's a process, taking forever. And like, so can you talk to us or give us like about a process and the timeline of how to get from getting that first phone call until like getting the check?
He must have had a very good childhood. He's like, Stanford was so easy. So I say it's a full-time job, 60 hours a week for a year to raise any amount of money. And then plan on that and prove me wrong. I've had one founder prove me wrong so far. It takes a year because you're infiltrating an industry that you know nothing about. There's a huge learning curve there. You're explaining a product in a new way. It's not like your sales cycle where you're like immediately recruiting like customers and taking a relatively small amount of money. You're explaining like a very risky proposal as in a de-risked way to an investment industry, which is a new skill. So there's a huge learning curve to that. It just takes a year to do it, I think. What's your timeline?
I don't know about timing. I've heard a year. I've heard at our stage, people doing it much faster. I think because also people are coming at it from different points, right? So I won't dispute or argue with that. The only thing I'll add is that I think your methodology for building your list and going through that process should kind of be the following. First, you should get introductions. You should go out to your network. I know building a business is literally, you feel like you're begging all the time and asking for favors all the time to everyone. Fundraising is no different. You gotta ask those favors. So go out to your network and try to get introductions into venture capital firms. And also don't have your best meeting first, right? So have some practice because your pitch is gonna get better over time. So that's sort of like the first round. And then you should start building your list and think about it like a sales process, right? So go out there, like it's very public what VCs exist because VCs market themselves, and research their websites and try to figure out, okay, these are the VCs that I think invest in my industry, my stage, my geography, all of those things. Build out that list. Go onto their website and see, okay, which person within this VC should I reach out to, right? Don't only reach out to partners. There are VCs out there that have non-partner folks who are very influential, will more likely talk to you than a partner will, but also talk to partners and make sure that those people are also aligned in your industry, your stage, whatever, especially for those big firms. Like you'll have partners that focus on different industries. Make sure you're talking to the right one. And then try to figure out you have connections into those firms. Like do that first. If you don't have any, then you gotta start cold emailing. Like I don't know what else to say. Like you gotta reach out to them. And like a sales process, you just hammer them, and there are different kind of methodologies to doing that. Oftentimes VCs write blog posts. You can reference a blog post, be like, hey, I love this post. Like, can we talk about this? Or something that they're particularly interested in, and try to get in that way. But I think it would be naive to say you can do this whole process with strictly warm intros. That would be nice, especially like if you're a woman or if you're not white, like your universe is going to be smaller because like-minded people end up being together. So I think it's very naive to say like only depend on referrals to get in. Think about it like a sales process and just like get through your list, and then all you need at the end of the day is for one group to say yes, and you're golden.
And just like a sales process, they don't call it churn because it's not rote and repetitive. So you end up doing it a lot. And so like take the feedback from those meetings and turn it around as fast as you can. Like you said, a quick no is so much better. If someone's met with you twice and hasn't given you an answer, move on.
Yeah, and then if they say no, ask them for intros to other VCs. Make them feel
Or a
really
personal
bad.
check.
Be like, oh no, you wasted all my time. Who can I talk to? Intro me to somebody.
It works, we're human and we feel guilt.
Better yet, like if they tell you no in person, ask them in person for an intro. Like they have to say
Practice
yes.
the eyes like the
Alright, I think we have just one final question.
Question. So, how involved is, besides just like a co-founder, in terms of like the VC process? Is it like the entire team that's involved, or is it to a much higher degree just one or two co-founders, typically speaking?
I would keep it smaller, and I would prioritize the stronger presenters being there. So I wouldn't say, oh, because this person has this title, like we gotta have them in there. CEO should always be there, and then besides that, I would say fewer people is better, and prioritize people who are better at doing this stuff. Like if you have a co-founder who has no interest, in meeting with a bunch of VCs, like they don't need to be there. The VC will meet them later in the process.
I think the VCs are really just trying to wrap their heads around the team. Like who is actually executing on this? Who are these people? How many of them are there? How much overhead is there, right, per month? Like who's getting paid? Who's got equity? Like what's going on here? That's really all that we're trying to figure out. I would say the kind of traditional like Thinks HubSpot model is like two co-founders, one who's a tech geek and one who's like social. And so know who you're presenting and know who fills out what roles. So I've had co-founder meetings where it's not the CEO. And so I've said, like, why isn't the CEO here? And they said, well, he's more technical and I'm more the sales side. Okay, then like he should be the CTO. And so make sure that the roles that you're presenting actually reflect what's going on in the company, and just try and keep it like transparent and easily understandable, because we're looking for reasons to say no. Because we're literally trying to figure out just what's going on there.
Actually, so it's not really regarding this question, but what you said brought up a point for me, which was the self-aware thing. So I think one like really tough question that VCs might ask you is, so let's say you're the founder and you're the CEO, or you're the founder and you're the CTO, and they ask you, do you think you're going to be a long-term CEO of this business? Or like, how do you see like your role playing out over time? And I think the VC probably has their own determination of what that is, but the answer is not always that you're not the right person, but they're gonna ask the question. And so being really self-aware, and maybe that process involves like asking people that you trust around you what they think about that, I think is important, because I think that's a conversation, especially at the early stage, that can happen. And if the VC doesn't think that you guys are aligned on that, that's a big reason to say no, right? Like if the VC thinks you're probably not the right long-term person and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna be here forever, like that's just, it's not gonna work.
Founder drama is real. So like make sure that you have worked as a team on these answers and that you're presenting the same thing. My favorite question to ask is, what's your exit strategy? Because people either assume it's for them or the company. And they answer, so like, I'm gonna make a lot of money and go to Florida. And I was like, that's not, I meant the company. But if that's your priority, thank you for coming in, it was nice to meet you.
Alright, well. Just one question.
Okay, last question.
We talked, you guys talk a lot about team and co-founders. What about solo founders? Are they just naturally inherently more risky?
Not to me.
Not to me either. I think it depends on the founder, but usually no. If they can have all the self-awareness stuff that we talk, like solo founders in a basement, but like solo founders who've surrounded themselves with a team that balances them and that can mentor and lead, I don't think that's risky at all.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes there's more drama with more than one founder. There's this like woman in Silicon Valley who is a therapist for founders. She makes a shit ton of money. Oh my god. If you guys like are thinking about what to do next and you're interested in therapy, that is an amazing business, because guess who pays for that therapist? It's the VCs.
Me too.
She charges so much money, and she does all her business through Skype. Because founders are so busy, like they're not gonna come visit her. And so, and I know this because my best friend is a co-founder of a business, and she had issues with her co-founder. And their angel investor was like, this woman, you gotta go see her. I think she like, I mean, I might be wrong, but I think she's like $1,000 an hour, like insane. Because it's a real thing, and it happens all the time. It's really important to get it right. And I was like, Steph, like, how was your experience with her? What did you think? And she was like, she was amazing. She was worth the money, like, and they worked out their issues. So, if you guys are looking for a new job opportunity that makes a lot of money, you go do that.
She's my new hero.
We can't afford her.
We can't either. We just throw like stuffed animals at each other in my office to work out our issues.
Alright, well, any parting words or of wisdom you want to leave us with?
Sorry, we're all out of wisdom.
That wasn't enough?
That was great. So let's just take a moment to acknowledge both of them for coming in.
So thank you guys for coming. We're gonna stay around until 8:30 to do networking, and before that, I just want to bring my co-chair Elizabeth Yang up to the front to talk to you about our next event. And if you enjoyed this event, we'd love your feedback. Even if you didn't, we'd love that feedback as well, because we're always looking to grow and improve. And if you have any questions about ACE or you want to learn more about our events or getting involved, Tristan, can you just raise your hand? Tristan's in the back, and he can answer your questions. We're happy to as well. So Elizabeth?
Yes. So how many of you really enjoyed the night tonight? It was so amazing. Can I just get another round of applause for the panel? So I'm Elizabeth, and I just want to share with you that we are having our next event on August 14th.
talking about all these dramas with founders, we're going to be doing our workshop in August focused on how do you build your leadership and build a winning team. We totally planned this, like totally lined it up very well. But it's going to be an intensive workshop. You're going to get an opportunity if you come to get a Gallup personalized assessment. It's called the Builder Profile. What they did was they studied successful serial entrepreneurs, identified their top 10 strengths, and said this is what it's going to take to build a winning team. And so you're going to get an opportunity to do that, and then we're also going to map out what your team looks like, and whether that's a team that you work with or you have, or your sounding board, taking a look at what your strengths are, what roles work for you, and how do you map and build your social network to build that team is going to be so powerful for you. So that's our next event in August. And then in September, we're going to be focused on marketing and social media for your business at different stages as well. And that's going to wrap up our year for us all. So let me or CL know if you guys have any questions. Tristan is our membership guy. And look forward to seeing you at our next event.